photography fans, it's Michael from Fujifilm again. In this episode, we are going to talk about autofocus performance, and in particular that of the recently introduced Fujifilm X-H2S camera. Now, the reason is that this camera has this new stacked BSI 5th generation X-Trans sensor, which is remarkably fast, and it's coupled with our 5th generation X processor. And together you've heard a lot of great talk about how remarkable the performance of this camera is. So I thought of a way to show you how the autofocus really keeps up. My methodology was I took 7 different lenses, some as old as 10 years from when we originally introduced the entire X series, to some that only came out a year ago. So they're completely different focal lengths. Some were zooms, some were primes, some had different motors and stuff. And I sat in front of the camera, which was on a tripod, had it on autofocus continuous, and I moved around backwards and forwards in all different directions and just let the camera do its thing. Now, because I ended up with about 35, 40 different takes of different permutations of camera settings with different lenses, I'm not going to make you sit through the whole thing. We're just going to look at some selects that are very representative, a mix of the old and the new and with different settings. Okay, now one thing I want to point out that's very important up front is that when you look at the actual tests, you're going to see that I have the LCD screen display is recorded on the signal. So I did that so you can see the shooting data, you can see where the focus box is, and you can see the eye detection at work as it follows. Now, in order to record that through the HDMI out, you have to enable the HDMI overlay recording function. When you do that, it compromises the video picture. It does, okay? So if you see here the difference between with the overlays off and with the overlays on, you can see with it on, it gets kind of a little bit softer, a little bit more compressed looking. It's just not nearly as good as a clean recorded signal. I want it clearly understood though, this is not representation of what the recorded picture is of Fujifilm cameras in video mode. Another thing about methodology was I did different settings from default to changing things like the zone to the multi type of focus mode. I changed speed of sensitivity and the speed of the focus tracking. And let me remind you on what those two things are. So in the camera menu under autofocus, there are two things. One is called tracking sensitivity and the other is the autofocus speed. So the sensitivity is sort of the twitchiness or the responsiveness to when the camera sees a change in stimulus somewhere in the image. So is something moving and how fast does it respond? Think of your brain when you wake up. Think of your brain when you've had coffee. It's two different responses, okay? Now, once you've recognized that there has been a change, the second thing is the AF speed is now how fast do you turn the lens in order to keep up? So there's slow and there's fast, snappy, okay? So I did a couple of variations where I did super fast and then I mixed things up and I did the default as well. Now, it's not practical for me to do every single setting with every single lens. So if you have lenses that are not what I'm showing here and you really want to see what it's capable of, unfortunately you need to do this for yourself and try all the different settings in order to hone in exactly what works best, because there's no way I can give you a formula for every single lens because the lenses have different motors in them, right? So they're going to respond differently to those different tracking sensitivity and AF speed settings. Also, I played with the difference between zone focus and wide area tracking, in particular in combination with the face detection. Now, first of all, I want to say the face detection on this camera is phenomenal. It's really spot on, fantastic. You'll see for yourself, make your own judgment. The other thing is, you'll notice is that it brings up old 10-year lenses almost to the AF speed of the newest technology. So the processor and the sensor combination of the X-H2S camera improve your old glass as well as even making your new stuff faster. Now, the difference between zone and the multi is the zone obviously is you're telling the camera to concentrate on a particular area inside the frame. And even with face detection, it still will try to concentrate on that area. And what I found is that with the wide tracking, which basically just unleashes the camera and says, hey camera, use the entire sensor to acquire wherever necessary. When you have a subject that goes in and out of frame, the wide area snaps to the focus much, much faster. It acquires much faster than the zone area. So that's a recommendation. That's a conclusion that I'm going to give you right now up front. Okay, let's have a look. Let's start with one of our popular kit lenses, the XF16-80 at f4. And as you can see on the graphics, this is at the default settings straight out of the camera using the area AF. Now, I'm going to say I picked a deliberately busy background on purpose. A, to draw as much attention to itself as possible so that if it was going to fool the camera, it would be a good way to do it. Also, hopefully that you can see the focus changes when they happen. So with default sensitivity and speed on a current lens, and this was set around 23 millimeters, I believe, you can see the camera has absolutely no trouble following me as I move forward and back. So the next thing that I decided to do was to turn on face detection, and here you can see very clearly how it's acquiring my eyes and other parts of my face, and it stays locked onto those as I come closer and farther away. Now again, this is at the default sensitivity and speed of the camera as it comes out. And this is the area AF, so you're telling the camera to concentrate on the middle. Even though it's focusing on, it's hunting for the face, it still nonetheless will reacquire the background. Now with the wide AF mode, where you're letting the camera take the entire sensor into consideration, you see that the area box has gone away. But you can see the face tracking is still working very, very well. And in particular, what you're going to see is when I go off to the side, it stays right on with me, and if I go out of the edge, if I actually go off frame, it picks me up right away as I come back. So it very, very much stays on my face even when I'm out. Next, I decided to go with an older lens, and this is one of those 10-year-old lenses. This is the XF 35mm f1.4, and it's really, really nice and small and compact, and a lot of people like this, but it's got one of our original focus type motors on it, and sometimes it has this behavior that I call chattering or hunting. And you may or may not see this when things go out of focus and when it reacquires. You can see that kind of goes there and it doesn't quite lock in and it readjusts itself. Well, that's because of that technology. And then here it is with face detection. And again, a 10-year-old lens though now doing very, very well in keeping my face in focus and coming up to a high level of performance. If you look at the background, you can see the changes very, very quickly. Coming up next, what I decided to do is take the recent generation XF 33mm f1.4 and compare it to the XF 35. But I also changed the settings in the cameras. You see, it's the fastest sensitivity and the fastest speed. So this is as quick as these lenses are capable of performing with this camera, with face detection. This is the XF56mm f1.2, and it's with face detection, but it's back to the default sensitivity and speed because I was really curious to see how it works out of the box. Now, this lens was designed to be a portrait lens, and it was designed around its optical characteristics, not for autofocus speed. And you can see how there is a slowness to it, but it's really smooth and nice. Next, what I did was, as you can see on the left, and this is cropped in obviously from the full frame, is I upped the sensitivity and the speed to see if we can help this particular portrait lens perform a little bit better. And indeed it does. You can definitely see that it reacts much faster and it moves much faster. So these are settings that you should play with your own lenses. Now we come to the 56mm 1.2 compared to the more recent XF50mm f2, which is a lens that's about half the price, but the f2 lens definitely does have faster focus. A, because it's smaller and more compact, so there's less glass in it, but also because it's a different set of focus motors. So choosing a different kind of lens technology may be very, very helpful, especially if you're shooting video on a camera using a gimbal. And here I've taken that same 50mm f2 lens and I have adjusted the settings so that we have a comparison between default and as fast as possible. And once again, you can see the response is very, very different when we change the settings to tell the camera to act quickly. And this is the last, where what I've decided to do was slow down the sensitivity. In other words, on the left we have the brain without coffee, and on the right we have the brain after coffee. But both of them have the fastest setting for speed. So what you should see is that there is a lag on the left when it recognizes I go out of frame before it actually does anything. All right, I hope you enjoyed me being silly in front of the camera there, and I hope you found this helpful and educational. See you next time. Thanks for joining me.